Okay, so you want to own a private military company. You register a business, hire a few dozen men who used to wear a uniform, buy some rifles and some armored trucks, win a government contract, and bill by the day for as long as the war lasts. That's the picture. Plate carriers and wraparound sunglasses, a black SUV rolling through a checkpoint that opens for nobody else, a hangar somewhere with your logo on the door, and a phone call from a government that has a problem it cannot be seen solving. The movies sell you a version of this where the money is obscene, the rules are optional, and the only real risk is the one you signed up for. It sounds like the one industry on Earth that never runs out of demand, selling to customers too desperate to negotiate. It isn't. The private military business is one of the thinnest margin, most fragile things you can build. And almost every large firm that ever dominated it ended up in bankruptcy court, sold for parts, or renamed twice to outrun its own history. Let's start with what you think you're buying. You think you're buying capability. Men, weapons, vehicles, the ability to move a principal through a hostile city and keep him breathing. That's the product in your head, and it's the product in the brochure, and it's completely wrong as a description of the business. What you're actually buying is a payroll company with a legal department attached, one customer, and no control over when that customer stops buying. Every number in this industry flows from that sentence. You don't own a factory. You don't own intellectual property. You don't own a mine or a building or a patent. You own a list of names and the paperwork that makes those names legally deployable. Both of those things can walk out the door, and one of them can be taken from you with a memo. Start with the cost of getting to the starting line, because it's almost never what people expect. The rifles are cheap. Genuinely, in the context of this business, the hardware is a rounding error. An armored SUV runs somewhere between $150,000 and $300,000, depending on the protection level and where you're buying it. A small fleet of 6, with spares and shipping, might cost you $2 million all in. That sounds like a lot until you see the rest of the bill. The expensive part is permission. If you want to provide defense services out of the United States, you register with the State Department's Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, and you live inside the international traffic and arms regulations for the rest of your corporate life. Every contract where you train a foreign military, every technical exchange, every time an employee explains a weapon system to a non-American, that's a controlled export. It requires a license or an approved agreement. Getting one takes months. Getting one wrong is a criminal matter, not a fine you write off. Then there's the customer's own gate. To bid on a serious United States government security contract, you need a facility clearance. And to get a facility clearance, you need a sponsoring contract. And to get a sponsoring contract, you need past performance. That's the trap that kills most new entrants before they ever quote a price. The government will not hire you for work you have never done. And there is no way to have done it without being hired. You get in as a subcontractor on somebody else's prime contract, doing the parts they don't want at the margin they're willing to hand down. That period costs you years. And then there's the bidding itself, which nobody who hasn't done it believes. Responding to a major government solicitation is a project with a budget. A serious proposal on a large security services contract involves a capture team, a pricing team, technical writers, subject matter experts, and lawyers, working for 3 to 6 months. That effort costs between $200,000 and well over $1 million in labor and overhead, and you spend it before you know whether you've won anything. Now hold that number next to your win rate. In competitive federal services bidding, winning 1 in 4 is respectable. Winning 1 in 3 is excellent, which means the true cost of one contract win is 3 or 4 full proposal efforts, and you paid for all of them out of your own pocket, in advance, on work that generated 0 revenue. That's your real cost of entry, not the rifles. The rifles you can finance. The 2 years of unpaid paperwork and losing bids you finance out of equity, and equity in this business is expensive because nobody sane wants to own it. Here's where it gets interesting, because the unit economics of a single deployed person are the whole business, and they're almost never what the outside assumes. At the peak of Iraq, a Western security contractor on a personal security detail was earning somewhere between $500 and $1,000 a day. Elite guys with special operations backgrounds and language skills pushed higher. That figure got a lot of press because it looked enormous next to a soldier's pay. And it was. Now run the actual cost of putting that person on the ground. Say you pay him $650 a day, and he works a rotation of roughly 240 days a year, because he's not working 365, and you're paying for a rotation partner during his leave. That's about $156,000 in direct wages. On top of that comes Defense Base Act insurance. This is the piece that never makes the newspapers and quietly decides whether your company lives. Under United States law, contractors working overseas on government contracts must carry workers' compensation coverage under the Defense Base Act. In a genuine war zone, with a genuine combat exclusion waived back in, premiums have historically run from around 10% of payroll on the low end to well over 25% for people doing armed security. Call it 18% on your man. That's another $28,000. Then medical and life coverage, which for this population is not standard corporate insurance. Then kidnap and ransom coverage on top, because the client requires it and your lender requires it. Then travel, which means flights, visas, in-country transport, and the fact that moving one person into a hostile country is a logistics event, not a plane ticket. Then his weapons, his kit, his body armor, his comms, replaced on a cycle. Then his share of the villa, the generator, the food, the water, the local guards on your own perimeter, the fixer who keeps your paperwork alive with the host government. Then the invisible layer, your program manager, your operations center back home, your compliance officer, your recruiter, your accountant who reconciles a contract with 1,000 line items, and your lawyer who is not optional. Add all of it, and that $650 a day man cost you somewhere between $290,000 and $340,000 a year to field, which means you have to bill him out around $1,300 to $1,600 a day just to break even on him. Understand what that does to your business. It means the number the public fixates on, the contractor's day rate, is roughly 40 to 50% of what you charge. The rest is insurance, logistics, compliance, and overhead. And your profit is the sliver left after all of it. Now, here's the other side of the ledger, and it's where the fantasy of infinite pricing power dies. You are not selling to a desperate man in a hotel room. You are selling to a contracting officer with a spreadsheet, a competitor's bid open in the next window, and a legal obligation to justify the award. Most large government security work comes through what's called an IDIQ, an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract. The headline number on those is huge, and it's the number that ends up in the press. The State Department's Worldwide Protective Services program has been announced with ceiling values in the billions. It reads like a company just won billions of dollars. It didn't. An IDIQ is a hunting license. It's a ceiling shared among several qualified companies, against which individual task orders get competed one at a time. You won the right to bid, you have not won a dollar. Whether your share is $400 million or $4 million depends on task orders you'll fight for over the following 5 years, against the same firms who also hold the license. And then look at the fee. On a cost reimbursement contract, the government pays your allowable costs and adds a fee on top, and that fee is capped. Statutory limits on cost plus fixed fee work sit at 15% for experimental and developmental work, 10% for architect-engineer services, and generally under 10% for everything else, with negotiated fees on large services contracts routinely landing in the 5 to 8% range. On award fee contracts, part of that is not guaranteed at all. It's discretionary. You earn it by scoring well on a performance evaluation written by your customer. Sit with that for a second. Your upside is legally capped. Your customer decides how much of the capped portion you actually get. And your costs are audited by an agency whose entire job is to disallow things you thought were reimbursable. The Defense Contract Audit Agency can come back years after the work is done and rule that a category of your expense was unallowable, and you write a check back. And the alternative structure is worse in a different direction. On a firm fixed-price task order, you quote a number and you live with it. That sounds like the version where you finally get to keep your upside, and occasionally it is. Then the host government doubles the visa fee, or the airline that flew your rotation stops flying, or your insurance carrier reprices war risk after an incident in a country you don't even operate in, and every one of those increases lands entirely on you. You quoted 18 months ago. The price is the price. A single carrier repricing Defense Base Act coverage from 12% of payroll to 22% moves your cost on a 50-man program by roughly $1 million a year, and on a fixed-price contract that comes straight out of a fee that was 6% to begin with. That's how a profitable program becomes a loss-making one without anyone doing anything wrong. So the picture of a war profiteering machine printing 100% margins collapses on contact with the contract itself. Large defense services firms run operating margins in the mid-single digits. 6% is a good year. Logistics work is thinner than that. You are running a business with the risk profile of a war and the margin profile of a staffing agency. This is where the first trap opens, and it's the one that empties bank accounts quietly. Your entire cost structure is people, and people only make money while they're billing. The industry word is utilization, and it is the most important number you will ever look at. A contract ends. 30 operators come home. They are the exact people you'll need for the next contract. They hold the clearances that took 18 months to process, and they know your procedures. Keep them on payroll, and you're burning roughly $25,000 a month per man on people generating zero revenue. Let them go, and you'll spend the next mobilization scrambling to rebuild a team from strangers, while the customer measures your fill rate from day one. There is no good answer to this. Every firm in the industry lives on the same edge. The large ones survive it by holding a portfolio of contracts that end on different dates, so the bench never gets deep. That's not strategy. That's the only way to survive. And it means scale isn't a nice-to-have in this business. It's the price of existing. The small firm with one good contract looks incredibly profitable right up to the month that contract ends, and then it discovers it was never a company. It was a single revenue stream with a logo, and replacing one of those men is not a job posting. You're sourcing from a population that's small by definition, running a background investigation, a psychological screen, a medical, a weapons qualification, and a training cycle against the customer's specific standard, and then waiting on a clearance adjudication that runs months and is entirely outside your control. Between recruiting fees, screening, training days you pay for and cannot bill, and the deployment package, replacing one deployed man costs a firm somewhere in the range of $20,000 to $40,000 before he generates a single billable hour. Your customer, meanwhile, is measuring your fill rate against the staffing table in the contract, and every unfilled seat past the grace period is a deduction from your invoice. So attrition doesn't just cost you a man, it costs you the replacement, the gap, and a line on the performance evaluation that decides your award fee. But here's the thing nobody explains about the money itself, which is that even when you win, you don't get paid for a while. Payroll runs weekly or bi-weekly. Your operators want their money, and in an industry where the workforce is mobile and word travels, a late payroll is a death sentence for recruiting. Your insurance carrier wants premiums up front. Your fuel supplier in country wants cash because there's no credit market for you there. Your customer, meanwhile, pays on government terms. An invoice goes in, gets reviewed, gets questioned, gets partially withheld pending documentation, and lands in your account somewhere between 30 and 90 days later, and the first invoice on a new contract routinely takes longer while the billing system gets set up. So you are floating 2 to 3 months of payroll on a contract that may be worth $50 million a year, and the float on that is millions of dollars in working capital you do not have. You borrow it. And here's the part that stings. The bank looks at your collateral and finds nothing. There's no inventory, no real estate, no equipment worth seizing. Your assets are men who can quit, and a contract that can be terminated for convenience by the customer with 30 days' notice. So the revolving credit facility comes with a rate that reflects that, and covenants that squeeze harder every time a contract nears its end date. This is the real cause of death for most mid-sized firms in this industry. They don't get shot out of business, they run out of cash between the invoice and the payment in an office on a Tuesday. Now here's the structural trap that has no financial solution at all. You have one customer. Not one big customer among several. One category of customer, which is governments, and in practice, usually one government, which is also your regulator, your auditor, your licensor, and the entity that decides whether you're allowed to exist. Every other business gets to diversify. Your restaurant loses a regular, you find another. You lose a government, you lose your license to operate anywhere, because the licensing and the contract come from the same building. And the mechanism that removes you is not commercial performance. It's news. In September 2007, a Blackwater convoy opened fire in Nisour Square in Baghdad, and 17 Iraqi civilians were killed. Whatever the company's internal view of that day, the commercial consequence was absolute. The Iraqi government moved to revoke the company's operating license. The State Department contract, the backbone of the business, did not survive it. The company changed its name to Z, then again to Academy, and Eric Prince sold it in 2010. That's the entire risk model of this industry in one event. Nothing about the balance sheet changed. Nothing about the operators, the training pipeline, the logistics network, or the cost structure changed. One afternoon, executed by a handful of people out of thousands, wrote the company off, which is why the compliance and oversight cost in a serious firm is not corporate theater. It's the only insurance against a risk you cannot buy insurance for. Every vehicle tracked, every round accounted for, every escalation of force incident documented within hours, cameras and recorded radios, so that when the accusation comes, and it will come, you have a file. That machinery costs real money and generates no revenue whatsoever, and firms that treated it as an expense to trim are the firms that no longer exist. Now let's talk about where the money actually is, because it isn't where you've been looking. At the height of the Iraq War, the contractor population in country was roughly equal to the number of American troops. Well over 100,000 people, and the overwhelming majority of them never carried a rifle. Armed security was a small slice, commonly estimated in the range of 10 to 15% of the contractor workforce. The rest cooked, drove, welded, wired, fixed generators, ran laundries, hauled fuel, and maintained aircraft. That's where the volume was, and the money followed the volume. The Army's LOGCAP program, the umbrella contract for base life support and logistics, ran to tens of billions of dollars over the war, with KBR as the dominant performer. No firm doing armed protective services came close to those revenues. The pattern repeats everywhere. The trigger pullers are the smallest, riskiest, lowest margin, most politically radioactive part of the industry, and they exist largely because they open the door to the parts that aren't. Look at how the successful firms actually built their money. Blackwater's growth engine was never just the protective details. It was a training facility in North Carolina, thousands of acres of ranges that charged agencies and departments by the seat, year after year, with almost no deployed risk. It was an aviation arm flying government contracts. It was logistics and support work. The security details generated the headlines. The infrastructure generated the annuity. That's the reframe hiding inside this whole business. Guarding people is an event. Training, aviation, base support, maintenance, medical evacuation, and now intelligence and surveillance work are subscriptions. Events are priced against a competitor with the same cost structure as you. Subscriptions are priced against the pain of switching. And the highest margin work of all in this industry isn't operational at all. It's advisory. Putting 20 retired senior officers into a foreign ministry of defense to write doctrine, restructure a command, and design a training program is a contract with almost no capital requirement, almost no insurance exposure, and billing rates that reflect scarcity rather than headcount. Firms like MPRI built entire businesses on exactly that, and the risk they carried was a fraction of what a protective detail carries for a fraction of the fee. There is one other model, and it deserves its own explanation, because it's the one that produces the numbers people imagine when they imagine this industry. Some governments cannot pay in cash. They can pay in the ground. In the mid-1990s, the South African firm Executive Outcomes was contracted by the government of Sierra Leone, then losing a civil war and losing the diamond fields that funded the state. The reported price was in the range of $1.2 million a month and around $35 million in total. The government could not fund that from a treasury it barely controlled. Concessions and mining interests linked to the firm's network became part of how the arrangement worked. The same logic reappears in the Russian model. The Wagner Group's operations across the Central African Republic, Sudan, and the Sahel have been repeatedly documented as being financed through mining and resource concessions granted to affiliated companies rather than through conventional contract payments. Gold and timber and diamond rights instead of an invoice. On paper, that's the highest margin structure in the industry. You're no longer selling days of labor at a capped fee. You're taking an equity position in a resource, and if the deposit is good, the return has no ceiling. Understand what it costs you, though. Cash contracts end and you walk away. A concession makes you a partner in a regime. Your revenue now depends on that specific government surviving, on that mine remaining accessible, on a road you don't control staying open, and on sanctions regimes that can be written in a foreign capital in an afternoon. You've traded a customer for a country. When Prigozhin's relationship with the Russian state broke down in 2023, the value of that entire network was rewritten in about 72 hours, and none of it had anything to do with the quality of the ore. The concession model doesn't remove risk. It concentrates it into a single point of political failure, and then denominates your entire balance sheet in it. So let's talk about how this business actually dies, because it's almost never how you'd guess. It isn't an ambush. It isn't a lawsuit, though there will be lawsuits. It's peace. Your revenue is a derivative of somebody else's foreign policy, and foreign policy changes faster than your cost structure does. A drawdown is announced. Task orders go unrenewed. The billion-dollar ceiling on your contract vehicle stays exactly where it is, and the orders underneath it stop arriving. Your revenue can fall 60% in 18 months, while your debt stays exactly the same size. Constellus, the successor entity that eventually absorbed the old Blackwater lineage, along with Triple Canopy and others, was rolled up under private equity ownership with substantial leverage against contract cash flows. As Iraq work contracted, that debt stopped making sense against the revenue underneath it. The company went through a Chapter 11 restructuring in 2020, and lenders took ownership. Nobody lost a firefight, the customer just bought less. Then Afghanistan ended in 2021, and an entire supporting economy of aviation, maintenance, base support, and security contracts evaporated on a calendar date that had been publicly announced in advance. Firms had spent years building capability against that demand, and no amount of operational excellence made a difference, because the client left. That's the shape of this industry. Revenue arrives in violent spikes tied to events you don't control and can't forecast, and it leaves on political timelines. In the surge, you're staffing frantically, paying premiums to poach, buying vehicles at any price, and looking wildly profitable. In the drawdown, you're carrying an organization built for a war that ended, and every month you wait for the next one costs you money. The firms that survive multiple cycles all did the same unglamorous thing. They diversified into work that doesn't require a war. Embassy guard forces, critical infrastructure protection, maritime security, corporate risk consulting, training, aviation services, boring, low-drama, contracted revenue that keeps the lights on and the clearances current through the years when nobody is shooting. Which brings you back to the man on the running board of the black SUV, and what he actually represents on your income statement. He is not the business. He is the most expensive, most fragile, most politically dangerous, and least profitable thing your company does. He exists so you can hold the contract, and the contract exists so you can sell the training, the logistics, the aircraft, and the advisory hours that pay for everything. You're not in the war business, you're in the standby business. And standby is priced by governments, audited by accountants, and canceled by news cycles. Every war ends. Every drawdown is announced before it happens. Every contract has an end date printed on it the day you sign. The whole industry runs on the certainty that today's demand will disappear, and the only question that has ever mattered for anyone who owns one of these companies is whether the thing you built during the surge can still pay its own payroll during the peace.